Well, in previous series, we've discussed our mentoring intelligence, our skill set in developing others, as well as an emotional intelligence, our social skill set in understanding and working with others. Yet to learn the skills to increase our CQ, or the ability to relate with those from varied cultures and teams, is also crucial in accomplishing common goals. In this episode, we'll further define cultural intelligence, or CQ, and then how we can increase our own cultural quotient.
Welcome to another of Dr. Phil's Leadership Matters podcast. In this series, Phil will be sharing from his decades of serving and leading multicultural teams from Africa to Eastern Europe to Latin America. Just click the link in the description box to download our free resources or the complete study guide. You can also access any of his other podcasts by going to icmcanada.org/leadershipmatters.
Teams that fail to understand and take into consideration the embedded cultural values of its various members will struggle to fulfill their common objectives. The potential damage done in teams by leaders who do not develop their own cultural intelligence should not be underestimated. As with EQ, our emotional intelligence, and MQ, what I coined the mentoring intelligence, CQ, or cultural intelligence, is not something leaders are born with, but are rather skills and attitudes that they need to learn to develop. See, a lack of CQ can be displayed in various attitudes and actions. Fundamentally is being unaware of our own cultural biases. For example, not being aware of how loud some cultures tend to be in public compared to other cultures. Northern Europeans tend to talk to each other in hushed tones when they're in public. So when we lived in Berlin, we noticed our visitors would often stand out in public due to the volume with which they conversed with each other. Those with higher CQ recognize this, but others had to constantly be shushed. This is kind of a minor issue, of course, but a lack of CQ is also displayed by a tendency to be threatened or uneasy when interacting with those from another culture. When we can't explain the behavior of others, we tend to impose our values on them. There's a tendency to want them to be, kind of like us, even though their actions are not based on the same values and motivations as ours. This leads us to become unable to transfer the knowledge we have from one culture to another culture by not recognizing how our own cultural values influence our behaviors. This is often more difficult as it occurs at a subconscious level. Are you aware of the cultural biases you may have and that your team members may have? How does this mental programming impact this? Now, cultural intelligence means being able to understand our cultures by changing our own thinking and actions as we interact and respond to those of other cultures. We will see that this involves three components. One, learning fundamental intercultural principles. And number two, practicing the ability to perceive and interpret cultural cues and their meaning. And finally, number three, develop appropriate behaviors for differing cultural contexts. So if this is so important, then the obvious question becomes, how can we increase our own cultural intelligence individually and then as a team? Thompson and Ingham used three concentric circles to describe what makes up CQ. These are the three circles of knowledge, awareness, and behavioral skills. So let's look at each one of these. To be an effective member or leader of a multicultural team, the first step is to gain knowledge and learn to increase our own CQ. Culture can most simply be defined as the resultant behavior as people respond to their environment. As I've stated elsewhere, another definition would be it's kind of just the way we do things around here. It's the unwritten rules that everyone in one culture know on a subconscious level. We typically are unaware of our own behaviors and how they're embedded in our own culture. It's kind of like the fish who is unaware that he is surrounded by a culture of water until he is put in another context like air. At that point, he truly is a fish out of water, and of course, gasping for air. These strong bonds between people as they share the way they do things together are invisible ties or rules that are understood by everyone who shares that same culture. However, we often think that everyone else shares those same values and culture. But they can only hold to this belief, and we can only hold to this belief as long as we stay in our own context or homogeneous group. Once we become that fish out of water, the reality of our uniqueness only really then becomes evident. In our current global context, there are really fewer truly homogenized people groups. The migration of people for various reasons, as well as the expanded travel opportunities we all have and all the various media platforms that we're all involved with, all this means that we deal with those from many cultures, usually on a daily basis, even when we remain in our own country. This makes learning these skills, I think, really important for all of us. Gerd Hofstede in his research describes culture as shared mental programs that condition individuals' responses to their environment. He continues this idea by describing 3 levels of mental programming within our personhood. There's our personality, there's a culture, and then there's human nature. In a 3-level pyramid, human nature is the bottom level, so it's the most fundamental. Then he places culture on the next level up, and personality, on the top level. If this were an iceberg, personality would be above the waterline at the very top and what we all see, and each level below is at a deeper, unseen level. So he describes each of these areas of personhood like this. At the shallowest level, or the top of the iceberg, which I said, is personality. This is the specific makeup and experiences that make up an individual, make them unique, and is typical of what others notice about us. This is both inherited and learned, and is very specific to individuals. The next level down in our personhood is our culture, and these are the common experiences shared with a particular group of people, which could be as large as a nation, or it could be even a subgroup within a culture, or with an organizational subculture. It could even be like a church subculture. These are specific to groups, not just to individuals. Now, at the deepest level of our personhood is human nature. That's the level down even deeper. And these are the common biological reactions that all humans share. They're universal and they're not learned, and they're pretty fundamental to what makes us human beings. Increasing our cultural intelligence then has to do with learning these common experiences of a group and how they may differ from our own common experiences. It assumes certain basic human qualities and experiences that all human beings share, as well as the unique expressions of personhood displayed through each person's temperament or personality. This existence of subculture within larger cultural groups, as well as individual personal differences, indicate the wide variation there is between individuals with any large ethnic group. Consider how your common experience differs from the group and from individuals within that group.
You can view or listen to any of Phil's other podcast series by going to icmcanada.org/leadershipmatters. These include Mentoring Intelligence, Finishing Our Race, the Fivefold Ministry, as well as a variety of other leadership series he has taught over the years. You could also check out our Christian Leadership Institute, which is a unique competency-based ministerial mentorship. To download any of our resources associated with these series, visit our library of materials at icm.org/resources.
Okay, so we've been looking at cultural dynamics and discovered that there are several key characteristics of culture, and these are all shared by a group. I introduced the concept of mental programming, which helps to explain why a group has certain common traits that are not shared by others outside of the group. This mental programming is learned over a long period of time as people interact with their environment, including their family and other societal institutions which they are a part of. These patterns are very resilient and one of the most difficult aspects of human connections to change. This programming is so strong that it is hard to break away from it, even after it is recognized. This is why adapting our behavior to other cultures is so difficult. Having said that, immigrant populations around the world prove that through the process of acculturation, new mental programming and the resulting behaviors can occur with effort. All this can change. But we have to be intentional to make it happen. Culture is also an organized system of values, attitudes, beliefs, and meanings that are related to each other. We usually just see the tip of the iceberg, certain actions or behaviors that are visible. but we don't necessarily see as the more complex system of values, ideas, and a worldview that particular behaviors are based upon and what they actually express. Often those in the culture, like fish in the water, don't fully appreciate or recognize the values that their long-standing behaviors are based upon. When I was in China, I asked them why they use chopsticks rather than utensils like most other cultures use. I know, dumb question, right? Now, I wasn't being ethnocentric, but nobody really knew. It was just the way they had always done things, which proves the point of culture. They could not explain that it started sometime during the Shang dynasty of 1200 BC. They did not know that Confucius actually advocated the use of chopsticks as he thought they were potentially less dangerous or violent than knives. Of course, he had not seen any martial arts action movies yet. Chopsticks also seem to be suited to the types of food Chinese typically eat. Now, they knew none of that, the people the audience, only that it was just the way they had always done things. They were that typical fish in the water. This speaks to another characteristic of culture, namely its invisibility. While we see the expressions of culture, the technical term being artifacts, much of the culture underlying values and assumptions are under the surface and they're invisible. But they're still powerful in their ability to influence our behavior. However, the strength of these cultures' ties are not equally strong among all people. Some are stronger, some are weaker. Some cultures have a high degree of uniformity determined by the majority within that culture, while others are more diverse with a more loose social culture or structure. What are some of the behaviors that you engage in that are just part of your culture? How do you think being aware of these can help you become less ethnocentric? It is important that we make a distinction between nationality, and I'll sometimes use the term passport country interchangeably here, and our ethnic culture, or even an organizational subculture. While these influence each other, they are also distinct from one another. It is important to recognize that subgroups within a nation are influenced by both the majority culture as well as the overall ethnic culture of the nation. While globalization is a reality, it is clear that it is not producing one homogeneous global culture that some a generation ago thought it would. Some thought that the McDonaldization of the world would eventually lead to one culture. While many cultures have been influenced by what some have called the Americanization of the world, one does not need to dig too deep to realize that a few Starbucks or fast food chains in a country is not enough to change the basic values that the local culture is based on. Usually this goes back hundreds or maybe even thousands of years. So while in some sense all cultures are modernizing, they are doing so in a unique way. Convergence of cultures only seems to be happening superficially and not at the values and assumptions level, which is much deeper and much resilient. So it is not really possible, or I'd make the case even desirable, to export culture. The desire of cultural intelligence and the ramifications it has on leading multicultural teams is crucial. Another reality is that the pace of change in cultures is very slow, as culture exerts tremendous pressure for conformity on those in that culture. So everyone can breathe a collective sigh of relief, as it is unlikely that the complete westernization of cultures will be happening anytime soon. And what did you learn about the dynamics of culture and teams that you were not previously aware of in this episode? And how has your culture been influenced by outside forces and other cultures? And how does this impact your team? It is precisely this rich cultural diversity that can serve to enrich humanity with different ways of doing things, which ultimately provides great resilience for humanity. I realize that in this episode we've been looking at some pretty big macro and global issues, but these influence each of us on our multicultural teams as these are a microcosm where these same dynamics play out, but just on a smaller level. Learning to be part of a multicultural team will serve to provide the church with greater resilience and strength as it responds to Jesus' mandate to go and make disciples of all people. So next time we're going to consider more specifically how we can increase our cultural awareness and then learn to adapt our behavior at a team level. I hope you'll be able to join me then.
Thank you for listening to Leadership Matters and subscribing and sharing us. If you would like to have your own copy of this study, just click on the link in the description box. For any of our other leadership resources, check out our website, www.icmcanada.org/resources.